In this lecture, I will be talking about deployments in Kubernetes. Let me first talk about the replication set. The replication set is the next generation replication controller. So it's a newer version of the replication controller that I just explained to you in the previous lecture. It supports a new selector that can do selection based on filtering according to a set of values. For instance, the selection could be an environment is either going to be dev or QA. Not only based on equality like the replication controller. In the replication controller, you could only say environment equals dev. You couldn't do anything more complex. With the replication set, you can do more complex matching. This replica set, rather than the replication controller, is used by the deployment object. Let's talk about deployments now. A deployment is a declaration in Kubernetes that allows you to do app deployments and updates. When using the deployment object, you define the state of your application. Kubernetes will then make sure the cluster matches your desired state. A state can just be run this application and make sure it is replicated 5 times. It's just the way to describe this to Kubernetes is most easily done now with deployments. That's why just using the replication controller that we saw earlier or the replication set might be cumbersome to deploy apps. So those two things might not be fit to deploy your apps. It would just be too much manual work to then do updates and rollbacks and so on. The deployment object is much easier to use and gives you more possibilities. So what are those possibilities? With a deployment object, you can create a deployment, for instance, just deploying an app, update a deployment, deploying a new version of your app. You can also do rolling updates, which means zero downtime deployments. You're not immediately going to update your whole app, but you're going to do it in steps so that you will have zero downtime during this deployment. You can also easily roll back to a previous version of your app. You can pause and resume a deployment as well. For instance, if you want to roll out to only a certain percentage of your running pods. So this is an example of deployment. It looks, again, very similar to the previous specifications that I showed you. Currently, this is still in V1 beta. That's why you see another API version than V1. For sure, in the next releases, this will become stable and will go to V1. Again, this object has metadata. We give it a name. The name here is hello world-deployment. Then we have the specs. I'm going to run 3 replicas of this pod and the template is below. Template has again metadata. There's a label. The label says app is hello world. The pod specification then, we have 1 container, still our Kubernetes demo, still the same image and still the same port. So that looks very, very similar to all the other things that we have seen earlier, but I will now show you what the deployments really can do for you. To get information on the current deployments, you can use kubectl get deployments. Because deployments are using replica sets, you can use kubectl get rs, rs stands for replica set, to get the information about the replica sets. kubectl get pods with show labels can show you the pods that are running. You can use pods or just pod, and that will just show you the pods that are running, including the labels. So whenever we add a label to our pod, like the app label, then we can see those if we add show labels. kubectl rollout status and then type deployment and then the name of the deployment object gets the deployment status. So if you want to know whether the deployment was successfully completed, then we can use this command, and this command will show us that. kubectl set image of our deployment hello world deployment, we can change our image from Kubernetes demo to Kubernetes demo with the tag 2. We can actually run another version of this Kubernetes demo. There's a version 2 in this repository that is going to say hello world v2, and if you want to use that newer version of the Kubernetes demo image, then you can just tag your image with the specific version that you want. If you don't use any version, you will use the version tagged to the latest. If you specify one, then that exact version will be retrieved. So using this command can actually update your application to the latest version. You can achieve the same thing using kubectl edit, and then you can edit this deployment object. kubectl rollout status is going to give you the status of the rollout. If you update your image to a new version, then you can use this rollout status to see how the deployment is progressing. kubectl rollout history, if you want to see a history of your deployed versions. So let's say that you first have version 1, then version 2, version 3. kubectl rollout history will show you those different versions. And this brings us to something very useful. If you release a new version of your app, let's say version 3, and you want to go back to version 2, then you can do kubectl rollout undo, and this rolls back to the previous version. If you want to roll back to another version, you can see all the versions using rollout history. If you want to then roll back to version 1, for instance, you can just specify using rollout undo, you can specify to revision and then the revision number. That gives you the possibility to roll back to any version. In the next demo, I'm going to show you how this all works.